Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Weiss. I'm Associate Administrator for Pipeline Safety at the U.S. DOT, and on behalf of Administrator Quarterman, welcome to our workshop on pipeline safety management systems. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today and really just play Vanna White, tell you a couple of things quickly. I want to say thank you to the people on the webcast, particularly those who might be on the West Coast. If you're participating via webcast now, God bless you. So, any rate, we have a fair number of people. I think we'll give you counts during the day, but last time I knew there were close to 100 people signed up on the webcast as well. And some of these, we've gotten up to 300 to 400 people on webcast. So we'll try to make better use of that. I know we have people here from Calgary, too. They've come a long ways, I'm sure, just to hear this session today. So, at any rate, quickly, Michelle, thank you. Yes, always on my top of our list is a safety moment, just to make sure that people know we don't anticipate any fire drills, anything like that. But exit from the hotel is pretty easy. Just straight out this door, down the stairs, and out the front door. We'll assemble out there and just try to generally, we have a roster. We'll try to take a head count on that. So hopefully we got Ron something that was close to the spelling of his name on that one. Thanks so much. Okay, and I'm not going to go over the agenda today for you, read it in advance, but I think by now most of you know what we've done is we've pulled together a group of speakers to talk to you about pipeline safety management systems. This is a little bit different than what you might have expected. Ron will go into the recommended practice that we've been working for about a year or so to build. We have a lot of members of the committee who helped build that document here. The only thing I'll say about the RP, Ron, was that, first of all, it's a labor of love for me. I like this stuff. I've been doing it. Jim and I were talking, did this offshore. Tim Sampson and I and a number of other people worked offshore in safety management systems many years ago. That's as far as I'm going, Tim. Many years ago. So believe that it really can add value to companies. It's not about what should a regulation have. It's what can add value to companies. But the committee and we were talking about the idea of socializing concepts that are embedded within the recommended practice. And I think the reason we did that, honestly, was the way I describe this, when we first started getting together as a group, the amplitude on our conversations was all over the place. And it took us a long time to really settle in on what we wanted to talk about. But it's my sense, and I'll leave it to the other committee members to comment on that the group has really stabilized, and there's very little variation in our conversation now. But what I took out of that was at the beginning we were having a hard time resonating to key concepts. People were using words and getting tripped up over words instead of thinking about, are these the right concepts? Are they all of them? Should we have more, fewer? How should they be organized? Oh my God, we moved chapters around like this. It's like that cup with a P in the middle of it, right? But I think we've come out with something. Ron will go into it in more detail and talk to you a little bit about the committee, but at the end of today, we'll make that available to people, and Peter's working on a slide where the people on the webcast will know how to get to it. But our idea today is to socialize some of the key concepts that we really talked about at length repeatedly, and the reason for that is I think as you then look at the document, you'll have a better feel for what the committee had in mind and why we decided to put it there. I'm very thankful to have a host of speakers from outside of our world, and the reason for that I think is really they've been there before. They've been experimenting and actually implementing for a long time, and we've heard most of these people speak, and I think the committee all resonated to them. But I'll say it's, one of the issues we're going to wrestle with a lot is safety culture. To me, it's an attribute of a very positive safety culture when you're willing to both look beyond your organization, but also to help people beyond your organization. So I want to thank all of the speakers who will be on today. We have just the morning up until the break here. You ready? Okay, cool. But at any rate, with no further ado, I'm going to introduce the first speaker. I mentioned to the people who are here in person, Jim Watson will be our first speaker. He told me I don't have to call him Admiral Watson, but I have a hard time getting over that. So At any rate, Jim is a great guy. He's currently the President and Chief Operating Officer of the American Division of the American Bureau of Shipping. I think sort of Jim's first love as a naval architect. But in this role, he runs really ABS operations and engagements in North, South, and Central America and the Caribbean. Jim previously served as the Director of the Department of Interior's Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, where he ran regulatory oversight and enforcement programs for the offshore oil and gas operations in the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf. Before becoming Bessie Director, and where we really first got to know Jim Watson, he served as the Coast Guard's Director of Prevention Policy for Marine Safety, Security, and Stewardship. Responsibilities included commercial vessel safety, security, ports, cargo safety, and security of maritime. He was designated, I think probably interestingly here and where we can take some lessons, as the Federal On-Scene Coordinator for the Macondo oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm sure he's got a few stories to tell out of that one. Jim comes to us out of the ABS headquarters in Houston, Texas, so if you'll join me in welcoming Jim, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeff, and it really is a pleasure to be here. I feel particularly honored to be your kickoff guy here because, I think you're going to accomplish a lot of important work today, and it's very exciting to be at this stage of what you're doing in the pipeline safety business. Almost to the same degree as how I embraced this concept coming to Bessie over in Interior from Coast Guard before. I could tell you a lot of stories about Deepwater Horizon, but I guess I do want to say one thing, that I think those of us that were involved with that response, as much as what everybody saw on the TV, it had to do with the oil in the water and the ducks and the fish and all of the wildlife that was being talked about. My biggest concern was the people that were involved in that response and their safety. And when you think about it, we had the equivalent of a D-Day landing. That number of vessels and that number of people, and in that case those people were all fairly well trained and from the military, but it was just a few days. We went for about 88 days in that response, with as many as 10,000 people offshore or right in the surf all that time. And as far as I know, no one was killed in the operation. Nobody was even seriously injured that I'm aware of. Now there were people that had heart attacks, that natural causes. There was some car accidents and that sort of thing that we were, very saddened about. But, the things that the coordinators of the overall operation were directly responsible to. I think what we did was we put together a pretty good safety plan, and we insisted that everyone who was going to be a member of this response organization really understood what our concept was, what our philosophy was of safety. They attended the morning safety meetings. They listened to their bosses when they had job safety analysis on each of the activities that were going to be happening. And if anybody had any concerns about what was going to go on that day, they were definitely empowered to ask. Now, sometimes we would prefer that they didn't air this in front of all the media, but even that, I was more pleased that we were, having those people feel like they were involved with our safety program than whatever kind of issues might pop up when it inevitably did from time to time in the public. So my biggest degree of satisfaction with that operation, as with many operations that I've been involved with over the years, is safety. Let me talk a little bit about, I think, why I enjoy being at ABS, why the Coast Guard, I think, is an important place for other industries, other agencies to consider looking at as a template for moving out of a strictly prescriptive regulatory checklist type of a program into a broader, more stakeholder involvement kind of a system. And that's because of the nature of living and working at sea. And then this is a very, very old profession. And we have some pretty old organizations that are involved with that profession, and particularly the concept of having ships go to sea and then return with their crews and their cargoes safely. And the underlying thing is that the management is totally dependent on this crew, which is and the captain, which is out at sea. I mean, they are by definition operating pretty independently, about as independently as you can get on Earth. I guess it's you got astronauts in space, but other than that, if you go to sea, and this goes all the way back into the Middle Ages or earlier than that, the crew and the captain have to work as a team. The captain has to compel that crew to some form of a safety management system. And so over the years, there has developed a safety culture. It may not be what we would have today, but this concept of the necessity of a team that actually is living and working day in and day out, and their vessel is their lifeboat. I mean, they are going to all be dead if they don't work together and know the system that they're involved with. And there's no fire department, there's no ambulance, there's nothing but perhaps another ship and another crew at sea that could possibly help them when things go wrong. And so this was something that had some natural genesis. Nevertheless, I think the history of the United States is important here in this long history of maritime, in that in the middle 1800s, you started to see steel and steam and a new evolution, new generation of technology come, and it became necessary to have both an American Bureau of Shipping and a new function that ultimately became part of the U.S. Coast Guard, which was the Steamboat Inspection Service, and then the Bureau of Marine Safety and Navigation. And that is now close to 150 years old. And actually, both organizations started much more on the human side than on the technology side. The American Bureau of Shipping actually issued credentials to captains and engineers of steam vessels as one of their first duties. They didn't actually have rules for classing the vessels from a structural steel or a machinery standpoint. It was all about the competency of the people. But that evolved, and I think the same thing for the Steamboat Inspection Service, away from the people issues, the complementary things that I think go with an existing safety culture, which, as I mentioned, it was something long-standing in the maritime, to government functions that were much more related to the technology and to things that you could, hit with a chipping hammer to see if there was rust, or test a safety valve, or monitor new construction. And so, in a way, when we start to talk about safety management systems today, in my assessment, we're actually coming full circle, at least in the maritime business, where we realized, okay, I think we have maybe wrung out the vast majority of those kinds of disasters that were attributable to poor materials or poor workmanship or poor design or poor maintenance, because we've gotten very, very good actually at monitoring those things, and and the industry has actually gotten pretty good at quality control with checklists and with quality control monitors and third parties like ABS to go give classifications of different types of vessels with very in-depth rules. But when you see incidents like Deepwater Horizon, or the Exxon Valdez before that, or the Concordia over in Italy, these things keep happening. And you scratch your head and you say, well, what can we do now? And you realize that, well, it's really the same thing that caused people in the United States in the 1850s to say, well, you know, what can we do? And you get back to the people issues. And so I'm proud to say that I've been a part of this, starting with the Coast Guard's involvement with the International Maritime Organization about 20 years ago, where ultimately they came out with the International Safety Management System. And that has been in place. It's not perfect. I think we are at a stage in maritime where we need to take a fresh look at that and see if it's still working the way it was intended. But it was a first good step. It is the guidelines for companies, and again, these are companies who are going to be primarily based on shore, to support what should be a good safety culture on board the ship. And that's exactly what safety management systems should be. They should be, they should facilitate an end state of a culture, whether it's on board a ship or whether it's working in a process on shore, that delivers safety not for the management, but for the people who are involved in that system. And, I think that led to some of the discussions that I think began occurring over in the Interior Department. Probably not directly, but I think there's been a groundswell throughout the United States in different industries. You have the oil and gas onshore refineries and chemical plants and those sorts of activities that are all tied closely to the pipeline business. And so one of the models that occurred next, I think, was the API recommended practice 75, which is now referenced in the Bessie regulations for safety management systems. So let me talk a little bit, I guess, about what I've experienced since moving from Coast Guard to Bessie, rolling out these SEMS, these safety management system, safety and environmental management system regulations in the offshore oil and gas industry, and maybe tie a little bit of that to what I'm doing now in the American Bureau of Shipping as a third-party organization, which I think is important for you to use as a data point as well. First of all, Bessie was an organization that had been the Minerals Management Service was kind of shaken to its roots as a result of the Deepwater Horizon, was created as 1/3 of what used to be MMS, and the part that Bessie is the regulatory safety compliance function that was in MMS. The other 2/3 was the revenue collection for the royalties and the metering activities that you need to have, because we, as a nation, actually fill our treasury with lots of money from offshore oil and gas production. And then the third piece is what I call the land management piece, the landlord of the Outer Continental Shelf, which involves a lot of 5-year planning and leasing, bid leases and that sort of thing. And so when Bessie wanted to really make a difference, what's going to be different about this new bureau from the old MMS? The obvious thing was safety management system. And very fortunately, folks that had been in MMS for many years before had really worked very closely with API and had this recommended practice, and in fact had already actually developed a regulatory complement to go with that recommended practice, which involves some requirements for auditing. I think the important thing about the final rule is that the management system itself is not submitted to the government for review and approval. It's completely different than getting a permit to drill a well, for example. And in addition to that, the oversight really doesn't involve the inspectors of Bessie at all. The oversight is primarily a function of a company going to a third party, and that one of the third parties is ABS, for example, and having a third party do an audit in conjunction with the company itself. In fact, the first rulemaking didn't even require the third party. It allowed companies to do their own internal audits and just provide two things. One, what's your plan to do this audit? It's a 3-year cycle. And secondly, did you have any nonconformities? And if so, what are you doing about those nonconformities? That's all the government saw. The SEMS 2 is going to have a requirement, or does have a requirement, there's a final rule out for SEMS 2, for a lead auditor who comes from an independent third-party organization with certain criteria. And the Bessie rules don't get that specific on that criteria, because the industry itself created an organization called the Center for Offshore Safety, post-Macondo, that is actually providing that standard for the third-party organization, standard for how to do an audit to the industry and to these third-party organizations. So what are we learning from these audits? Well, I haven't seen them. I've shifted from the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement to the American Bureau of Shipping. And I went from being, I guess, in a position where I could have seen all of the audit reports to one of the several organizations that were involved as third-party organizations for just a handful, relatively, of the audits. What I do know is that we, as an organization at ABS, learned a lot from doing these audits. I think, first of all, we learned that the advanced planning and the amount of coordination that you have with a company is very, very important, and that the more that a company is actually involved with the audit, the better. And so I think what we'll see going forward is a little less emphasis on an ABS audit team and more emphasis on a company audit team with just an ABS person to do some coordination and training and planning. I think the other thing that is a good takeaway is that, and this probably applies to the pipeline industry, certainly applies to the offshore industry, and probably even applies to a lesser degree to the maritime industry. That crew on the ship doesn't act totally independently of numerous suppliers and contractors, and you're only as good as your weakest link. And so right now in the offshore industry, they're really trying to get their hands around the whole contract network and supplier network. So I think you'll see some more evolution in that particular area. I don't want to go on too much longer. I think the purpose here was to just sort of plant some seeds and some ideas and to get everyone charged up for a full day of some excellent speakers. But I do want to, I guess, go back to my opening thoughts about safety being the bottom line. I think it would have been very easy for us in the Deepwater Horizon response to just be totally pulled by media, by elected representatives, even by the President of the United States, to just get that damn oil out of the water. But again, if we had had one death or serious injury in doing that, that would have been a much worse disaster. You had 11 people die in the original incident, and 11 was too many. So we certainly, I think, did the right thing, and I think that's what this is all about. As good as some of the purposes that we have for the endeavors that we have in industry, and with great corporations and with great agencies, the bottom line is you're going to be measured by how safe you keep the people in the system. And I'm convinced that the best way to do that is with a strong safety culture at that level and a very supportive safety management system to ensure that safety culture is continuing when you're not there, basically, whether you're the manager or the federal government. So thank you very much, and I want to encourage you to have a wonderful conference. Thanks.
Just really quickly, I went to Jim very quickly because he's taken time out of his day with some other Coast Guard officials now to come over and speak with us. So I wanted to get to him quickly and give him an opportunity to get out. But he's been kind enough to offer to take questions from anyone here. I know there's a few inquisitive people here, but there are also people on the webcast. If you're watching the webcast, you can click on a link and submit a question to us. We'll be monitoring that and try to take it. So there are mics here. If anyone decides they'd like to ask a question, please feel free to stand up. We've got a few minutes for Q&A if you'd like. Too early? I was going to say, surely. Yes, please do.
Hi, Admiral. You commented on the importance of planning in the audit process, whether it's a third party or independent internal to the company. And I was wondering if you could comment on that a little more. What factors in particular?
Sure. I think when you put together teams, which is I think what we have evolved to. I mean, even when in the circumstance where there was a company in the offshore industry that read the initial SEMS 1 rule and said, okay, we are allowed to have our own company team do basically an internal audit and submit a report to Bessie that said, here's what we did and here's what we found. Some of those companies actually went to ABS or to other third parties and preferred to hire people who were experienced auditors. And so those auditors, and the lesson I think that was learned was that those auditors maybe assumed that they could, in a relatively short period of time, they could write a plan and basically just go out and do an audit of that company's facilities and operations. And what was learned is you really have to contact the company, contact those installations that you plan to visit, and get a real good look at the management system before you do the auditing, or else there's going to be some surprises. And then I think in the cases where we're going, where you actually have a fused team to do the audit, that's a combination of a third-party lead auditor with company internal staff to be your supporting auditors, that's going to take even more planning. We have, under the Bessie rules, deadlines. And just like anything else, doing your homework. If you wait to the last minute, you're going to be dissatisfied with the product. And so what we found was this planning made a very big difference in the quality of the audit and the efficiency of the audit. That you can go out and do observations of safety management systems either efficiently and effectively in a way that you're actually enhancing that safety culture, or you can do it in a way that you're going to turn people off and you're going to undermine the actual thing that we're trying to achieve. And I think good planning can tip the scale there one way or another.
I have a question.
Okay.
Linda Darty, I'm with PHMSA.
Okay.
And, I think it's very interesting, the discussion about the ship and that the survival depends on everybody doing their job. So I wonder about, the pipeline industry, where how do you instill the confidence in the janitor or the lowest level person in the organization to throw the red flag and say, hey, we need to stop work on this because there's a safety issue? How do you install that confidence? One, and then two, how do you prevent, for lack of a better word, a frivolous kind of throwing? How do you make sure that people are making good safety calls, but then aren't getting consumed with things that aren't really safety issues, but how do you balance that between legitimate safety calls and those that may not be?
Yeah, that I think that's the challenge for what I'll refer to as the shoreside application of this. It's probably easier to get the lowest, greenest guy on a ship at sea to just look around them and figure out that, well, I'm in this big time. I'm vested in this operation because there's that I don't want to be down in that dark blue sea. But I think the answer is probably you have to separate this safety from the other issues that people will tend to gravitate to, and it sort of goes back to my comments on the Deepwater Horizon response. There needed to be a dedicated space, for the safety management issues, for the job safety analysis, for the risk analysis that is done, for the stop work authority issue that really focuses a person's mind into a specific category for safety management, as opposed to all the other issues that are coming to the mind. Some people are just passionate about the environment, and they want to turn a safety meeting into an environmental response. Well, we got to do that too. So you have to provide a time and a place for these other issues. And I think the other thing is that people will say, well, again, when you're on shore, this is the company's pipeline. How can that affect me personally? You don't have that ability to say, well, once the ship goes to sea, you're on your own lifeboat here. I think that's when you really have to start appealing to a person's sense of community and family and just humanity. Okay, because you're dealing with things that can really cause a lot of destruction and ruining of lives if it goes wrong. And if a person can relate that responsibility to their management of safety in their daily work, if you can somehow get that little consciousness going on a continuous basis in every one of these workers' minds, I think you're there. Then all you can do is mess it up with a bad audit or a bad safety management system, or perhaps an executive from the company that says the wrong thing at the wrong time. This is a thing that really starts again with the right safety culture objective, and not it doesn't start with the safety management system. The safety management system has to support the right consciousness amongst the people that are involved in your endeavor, whatever it is.
Can I ask one?
Sure.
Well, I have the pleasure of asking the $64 question. The committee debated long and hard. There were only, I think, 3 regulators, or maybe 4, on there. Masood, myself, and Linda were on this committee. And I know that you've wrestled with this question of what Bessie was slightly different. It came in the harsh afterglow. The question is, what's the proper role of government, both in the SMS world and safety culture, barring an accident? And frankly, our integrity management program in the pipeline world came in the harsh glow after Bellingham, Washington. We had been experimenting with many forms of risk management before there, but we're driven to move things into code to reassure people. So I would just say, outside of a harsh glow, what do you think the proper role of government is?
Well, I'm not sure that it's absolutely necessary to have regulations to support something like the recommended practice. And I know you're working on a pipeline safety management system recommended practice. I think if you have an industry organization that can support the company's implementation of an agreed-upon recommended practice, that could actually be successful. I think it would be inappropriate for the government to stand completely on the sidelines and not be a part of the process of developing that recommended practice and encouraging the right kind of industry self-governance, sooner or later something is going to happen. I mean, I wish I could say that bad things don't happen, but they do, just despite our best efforts. And I think that at that stage, the government needs to be able to make a statement as to whether the industry was doing its best effort or not. It's the same thing that you would do if you're any kind of a good leader, right? You either are going to have to lead in a command and control type of way, or you're going to have to tell your folks how they should behave. And as long as they behave in the way you told them, you've got to have their backs. You've got to be able to defend them when times are bad. And I think that's probably been very, very difficult for government leadership over the years. It's much easier to say, oh man, those guys really screwed up. I'm glad I didn't have anything to do with that. But I really think if you could actually have the kind of a rapport between an industry and the agency that's responsible for the performance of that industry, where you could have that second form of leadership, especially when you talk about management systems. Okay, we're talking about management systems. You're not as a government regulator going to be able to manage every one of these companies yourself. That's just not going to happen. They're all going to have to be managed by the management of those companies. You would like to think that the various employees, just like the sailors on the ships, if they went from one ship to another ship, they would be comfortable with the safety culture no matter which ship they went on. But just like, computer software operating systems, people can handle the slightly different management systems that support the safety culture as long as those good marine practice kinds of things that they would expect as professional mariners are there. It can be supported in slightly different ways. So I think for the government to try to create a command and control system for management of even shipboard management is just not going to be successful. So I would propose that the solution is more the second approach, where you set out your expectations, you work closely with something like the recommended practice development, and then you have to, as the government, do enough monitoring to be able to, in the event of something going wrong, know whether you can stand and say, yeah, I have your back. They actually were doing what was expected, and something that none of us anticipated went wrong. So that's just my thoughts there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? One coming in from the webcast. You got just a minute?
Sure.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, let's see, without glasses. Okay, so from the webcast, beyond planning, what are your thoughts on managing the execution of the plan?
Okay. Yeah, I think what we're referring to here in this question is the planning for doing the audit, if I can interpretate that right. I guess it would be two different answers if you're talking about the safety management plan itself. Well, I'll just answer both. I mean, if you're talking about the safety management plan itself, I think I would just refer to my last comment, that I don't think whether it's a government agency or whether it's the third party, in the case of my company, the American Bureau of Shipping, is going to be able to implement the plan. That's going to have to be the company management and the employees. So that's the answer for that. If it's the audit plan, I think that there definitely needs to be some checking, and that's why we've learned a lot from this first round of audits on the companies that were compelled to do audits under SEMS 1 for Bessie. You should be constantly improving as the third-party audit organization or as the internal auditors your audits. And I think you also want to have a plan, but be prepared to, and which, of course, we had a lot of that going on with these first round of audits, prepared to realize, well, my plan wasn't as good as it should have been. In the case of these first rounds of audits, we wished we would have had more time before the deadline, before the hard deadline, which came about as a result of the regulation, to actually go back to the drawing board, adjust for the circumstances in which your auditors are placing themselves, and make some slight changes to the audit. So if you don't have that feedback during the audit process, I think you're probably going to have some disappointments doing the audits. So that's my answer to that question.
Okay, and I'll just say I think that certainly to the members of the committee, recognizing we'll get into this more about the plan, do, check, act cycle, and I would echo what you had to say, that if you're not checking, you have no idea whether your plans are in place or not. You think they are, you launch them. We've seen time and time again ourselves, even in audits, where the corporate office thinks something's happening, but when you actually audit on the field, you see that it's not.
Right.
It can't have the intended effect, obviously. So I think that's something we really have to gain out of that. So I'll pause for 2 seconds. Any last questions for Jim? If not, I hope you'll join me in thanking Jim.
All right.
Thanks so
Jeff.
much.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, I do want to sit down.
Okay, good. Thanks so much.